now that you have been warned, I want to thank you all for coming. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to introduce to you our guests, Aleš Debelyak and Igor Štiks. Aleš Debelyak published his first collection of poems in 1985, and since then has become one of the most interesting and leading poets of Slovenia and Central Europe. And he has published 8 books of essays and 7 collections of poetry in Slovenia, which have been translated into English, Japanese, Croatian, Polish, Hungarian, Czech, Spanish, Slovak, Italian. His books of poems in English translation include Anxious Moments, Dictionary of Silence, and The City and the Child. He has received the Slovenian National Book Award, the Miriam Lindbergh Israel Poetry for Peace Prize in Tel Aviv, and the UChicago Poetry Prize in Tokyo. Igor Štiks was born in Sarajevo, later moved to Croatia, so he is both Bosnian and Croatian. He published his first book, The Castle in Romania, in 2000, and received the award for Best First Book of the Year in Croatia, and it has been translated into German, Spanish, and English. His second novel, Elijah's Chair, was just published in 2006, and won both the Gauski Award and the Writers, Editors, and Literary Critics Club Award for Best Fiction Book of the Year in Croatia in 2006. Our guests are not only masters of the literary word, but are also sharp critics and thinkers. Aleš Debelyak holds the PhD in social thought from Syracuse University, and he's professor of cultural studies at the University of Ljubljana. This year, he is a visiting professor of international studies at Northwestern University, and that's why we have the pleasure of having him here, because he's in Chicago. He has published a number of books of critical essays. His nonfiction books in English include Twilight of the Idols and Hidden Handshake, which are related to Yugoslavia, or the events in former Yugoslavia, and Reluctant Modernity, the institution of art and its historical forms. Igor Štiks is a doctoral candidate in political science, both in the Institute for Political Studies, Sciences Po, in Paris, and at Northwestern University. And I can go on, but I'd rather not take up more time. So I just want to let you know that the Seminary Co-op has been kind enough to provide us with copies of most of the translations available in English. And until about 6 o'clock, you'll be able to purchase one and leave the evening tonight with a personal autograph by the authors. Please join me in welcoming Igor Štiks and Aleš Debelyak tonight. And as far as I know, Igor will start reading first. Okay.
Thank you, Angelina. Thank you all for coming. It's a great pleasure for us to come from north side to south side to see other parts of Chicago and certainly U of C. Obviously, communication is not so intense between these two universities. But yeah, here we are, and also there are some people that actually came from Northwestern here, which is very surprising, but also very welcoming fact. I absolutely, I'll be. Thank you for your introduction. I'll be reading from my first book because it's the only available in English translation. My second book, this is the original edition. I hope will be published in English, but it always takes a lot of time, so it will take this time probably a year, 2 or 3. I'll be maybe for those, well, maybe I should say a couple of words just about what I'm going to read. It's a Castle in Romania. It's a short novel with 2 stories, one set in Renaissance and the other around 1948. For those of you who are familiar with the history of Eastern Bloc, this was a very momentous event of Tito's breakup with Stalin. So this makes, let's say, historical context of the second story in this book. The novel starts with let's say a trip that a young Bosnian is going to visit castles in Romania with two French girls. So it's a year of '95. It's the last year of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So we won't find out more about this young Bosnian. But the two stories that he will be told in this castle will, of course, let's say, will provide us a context in which we can maybe understand this third story that will remain absent. Well, this was my idea, and of course you will see these two stories, the rhythm change, the style change. One set in the Renaissance is much more joyful, and the one set in the period of '48 much more, let's say, serious, although at the end everything, of course, ends quite tragically, and as it often happens in the situation in a complicated political and historical situations. So, okay, let me start with this. This is chapter 2, after a young Bosnian met a friar that will happen to be from the east coast of the Adriatic, that will happen to be from Croatian island of Rab. So they, of course, can speak the language they have in common. And the friar will tell to our young Bosnian these two stories. Okay. At this point, where the story of Enzo Strecci begins for the reader, allow me to skip a few hours and alter the sequence of events of that afternoon for my story, skipping to the moment when the sun was barely visible from the window of the friar's chamber, in order to make my account more successful, so that I might begin a second story and weave it into the first, for they are inextricably linked in my memory, and in any case is perhaps the best kind of storytelling of all. The first story set in Renaissance is basically a story about Renaissance poet Enzo Strecci, that I won't tell you whether it's fictional character or not. Many people actually did a lot of research on him, and he will research here and then, and so it seems like a quite interesting Petrarchistic character, and so on. Okay. I lean back in my chair after a few sentences, having forgotten my initial anger and why and with whom I had come here. During the entire length of the story of Enzo Strecci's fate, the friar would stand up, act out scenes, make speeches, imitate characters, express their thoughts and dreams, and convey the contents of letters and official documents. He was truly an omniscient narrator, a fact evident from the first part of this story. Now that's practically literature, I cried when he had finished the story of Enzo. It's clear you know a lot about him. As I told you, young man, answered the friar. Sometimes it seems to me it's the only reason I'm here. Somehow, regardless of time and space, Strecci and I are connected. Someone once said that we listen to stories and read books only to know we are not alone. I would add that the fact that we collect them, listen to them, or read them persistently all our lives speaks of our desire to surpass their uniqueness. Somewhere stories come together, perhaps crossing or overlapping, but they are never the same. Neither life nor literature, my boy, is heraldic. You know, on one coat of arms in the upper right corner, the same coat of arms is repeated, and in its upper right corner, it's repeated again, just smaller this time, and so on to infinity. That's never successful. The only thing that remains is the intervening, the coming together of fates. I believe that every story has a relative even if it's reversed, which of course one must recognize. The friar nodded as if to emphasize his words. Besides, knowing the fate of Enzo Strecci, you know Croatian quite well, I said in praise, still under the impression of what he had told me. I'm from the island of Rab, after all, he exclaimed. As far as I know, they speak Croatian well there, he said, laughing at his own joke. When did you leave? Why? The summer of '48, nearly 50 years ago. It was a rough time, is why. Isn't that around the time of the Information Bureau's resolution, Tito's break with Stalin? I'd ask, making my interest clear to him. That's just it, young man. The friar stood up from his chair and walked to the window. Was that the reason? I asked in anticipation, not realizing that my question would begin a new story. this time his own, in which variations were not allowed and humor would find little place. Outside, the woods had enveloped the sun, but the sultriness did not disappear with it. The friar turned, came back to his chair, sighed, and began speaking as one speaks about something precious, slowly, choosing his words with care in the hope of being completely understood. The sky darkened still further, becoming in the end a mantle of shining stars, and his story unfolded. "It's one of the reasons," he said. "It was unspeakably hot the summer of '48, a bit like this one. I was returning by boat from Trieste a few days following the resolution. You couldn't say whether it was worse above deck, wetting your head every once in a while, or below, where you couldn't breathe. As you know, it was issued at the beginning of July. I was coming back from Trieste, as I said, where I had gone a couple of days before with the intention of staying in Italy. My father had persuaded me to go, and for 2 or 3 days I had tried to obtain the necessary documents from the refugee office. I have to say that on that unspeakably hot '48, only a few Italian families were left, and it was clear, as things were going in those days, that soon there would be even fewer. My father liked to pride himself on his solidarity among them, claiming that there was no force that could expel him from the land he had fought for. Until recently, unassuming, and with our family at least unified, the neighbors threw rocks in our windows, avoided handshakes and greetings, and even sometimes shouted insult after us. But that year we had already accepted such things as an inefficient and banning means of intimidation and pressure to leave. After father's expulsion from the party in May of '46, which was based on his having helped some relatives who turned out to have several fascists in their family, the security police became regular guests in our home. My father was hard hit by the betrayal of his comrades, with whom he had until just the day before shared the adversities of the war and the post-war year, putting the country, as they used to say, on a new foundation. He tried in vain to justify himself before the authorities, asking to be rehabilitated, until the very day they found him lying helpless on the veranda, his heart giving out. Just as I was approaching Grab by boat, he lay almost motionless, imprisoned in the Benedictine monastery, maybe just a bit more at peace in the false conviction that I at least was safe. Here then, this is how it all happened. The heart attack destroyed him. Afterward, he was taken care of by old Ivanka, long since a member of our family, a woman who had been my second mother and nanny. My mother had been cut down by pneumonia back in 1940. After his expulsion from the party, my father was saved from harsher punishment by his firm commitment to communism and his considerable contribution, as it used to be said, to the battle in our region. I'm mistaken, for maybe the leniency of the authorities, which consisted in subjecting him to isolation, was caused simply by the fact that someone in the right place in those times, such was the rule, put in a good word for him in the same way that some falsehood or other had been attributed to him before. Because of my father's convictions and quick decision to join the national struggle, I spent my early days hiding in the homes of partisans on our island. And that's the answer to your question about why I speak Croatian so well to this day. The end of the war changed our situation only for a short time. The difference turned on the fact that before we had hidden in other people's home, well, now we hid in our own. After the heart attack, my father was seized by a fearful panic for my future. The news of the clash with Russia only added to it. From the day he was confined to his bed, he often spoke angrily, as much as he was able, about how there was no longer any life for us there, and how they were going to look for scapegoats among us. He meant the Italians. Afterward, he would say, the meek would single themselves out. Then he would add bitterly that things had turned into a mess, that the story had come to an end, and world communism would have to find some other place to show its feasibility. Still, even under the night when we heard about the resolution, he had never definitely set the day for my departure. Today I think that my presence dispersed the gloomy thoughts that come to the mind of a man in such a position and hastened the final hour. I comforted him as much as I could, along with old Ivanka, and closed the blinds and pulled the curtains shut. I tried hard to prevent anything from disturbing him and secretly prayed in the kitchen for his salvation. I could not let him see in his condition that reactionary forces flourished in his very own house. Why didn't I listen to him and prepare the documents in Trieste? Why didn't I listen to my dying father? Did I think I could survive? How could it be that the departure of my family and friends did not suggest to me that I should follow their example? Why did I want to remain in a town that was becoming less and less mine, in which there were fewer people every day who were glad to see me? I assume that these are the questions running through your mind. They all have just one answer, but let's do the things in order. Let's present them in their true light without forgetting the details. Let's expose the trap of fates. Chapter the second. Chapter about Enzo Stretch. Even if the devil himself had prepared her for that altogether unexceptional dinner, her appearance at the moment she entered the Mardi dining hall would not have caused Enzo to renounce all the caution and moral scruples that had periodically tormented his conscience while he relaxed in his warm bath. Then again, if he had not had such a captivating smile and promising build, perhaps the lady of the house would not have dared disturb her peaceful idleness. "So, you are the gentleman from Lombardy," she said briefly and coquettishly. "I'm honored you are to be our guest. Now that I've taken a closer look, I completely understand my maid's flush." Gazing up on the apparition that had uttered these words, Enzo shivered, but then more soberly and with a slight sense of resentment thought, "Does she take me for a child? What maid, damn it? It's my custom to first address the master upon entering another's house." That motto, which made him laugh good-heartedly at himself, brought the blood back into his face. Raising an eyebrow, he dared to toss out his first bite. Where the maidservants are in competition with their mistresses, the people must be truly marvelous. It seemed to Katerina in the first instant that the youngster was rather crude, but also, to an equal if not greater extent, sweet. After several moments of indecision, her initial attraction gained the upper hand. Mardi laughed aloud and added, as if God himself were his prod, "I would already seem, dear Enzo, that in this country you will find a wife too." In pronouncing these words, Mardi confirmed that it is entirely possible to follow a blind course despite healthy eyes. He looked straight at Maria, while the maid, having quickly hidden her face behind the fragile barrier of her hands, reflected, "From your mouth to God's ear, master. Had Enzo known by some chance that happiness betrayed is easily avenged, he wouldn't have ended up where he ended up, but would have immediately heeded Mardi's blindness and married the child. She wasn't such a bad catch, if you know what I mean." But God so desired that every evening the bishop's courier should arrive and Mardi should issue orders for his horses to be ready. Several hours later, he was received at the Rimini Episcopal headquarters, where he was given the confidential information. Habsburg spies and sycophants were all around. There was a terrible leak of information. Anyone might be guilty, and while strengthening all defenses, internal control should also be redoubled. Mardi cursed himself and his noble forefathers for leaving him such obligation. But meanwhile, in his house, a much less uncomfortable scene was taking place. As soon as the master had disappeared from sight, it was as if a breath of freedom wafted through his great home. As was her custom, Katerina gave orders that the guard should raise the Mardi banner up on the main tower. In her understanding, this would serve as notification that the master was not at home, but that his right hand, which was pictured on the banner as the claw of an incited lynx, still watched over the fate of his subjects. As some clever little had decided, the guards had to be doubled, and upon learning of the beloved master's return, they were to blow all the available trumpets regardless of the time of day or night. Mardi tried to talk Katerina out of at least the nighttime trumpeting. "For the world, my dear, is no way to blame for my return." But she insisted on this in particular, arguing that her love was stronger even than sleep. This declaration, you understand, comes from an anthology of banalities. And that whatever happened, she wanted to be awake to greet her one true love, and so on and so forth. And on this occasion, as on every other when she was deprived of his company for dinner by some pressing political matter, Katerina gladly abandoned herself to a feeling of neglect. Persuaded by Maria long before the young Lombardian appeared on her horizon, one similar evening she had allowed the servants to kill time at the master's table. That this had become an established custom by the time of Enzo's arrival was clear from the haste with which the servants rushed through the halls, their extraordinary elaborate dress, the frequent conversations about the state of Umberto's voice and of his lute, for they were excitedly waiting for the Mardi stable boy, should he be in the mood, to rain a hail of punches upon his faithful companion to everyone's joy and delight. Well then, all this murmuring, screaming, and shouting woke Enzo from his afternoon slumber. The moment he was up, little Beppo burst in his room with an invitation from the mistress to join her at dinner as soon as he could. After Beppo had announced his message, he rushed to join the treadmill of servants and impart gentry, which was, you'll agree with me, an unusual thing and would be even in our time. But Enzo broke him to a stop in doorway by asking, "Is it always like this here, boy?" "Only well the old. Forgive me, when Master Mardi is not here, Master Stretchy," he answered bluntly but precautiously, which earned him a box on the ear, but also, it must be said, a fine silver coin. Beppo concluded that this was truly an exceptional man. When Enzo entered the dining hall, the company had finished eating what there was to eat, and Umberto had already sung the one about the plum girl and the cowherd, as well as the one about the old master and the young servant girl. The company bowed to him, and Umberto hurried to finish his song, which made him mistake the final lines, where the priest says to the harlot in conclusion, "So, sinful soul, take into yourself my Jericho horn with all your heart." Everyone turned, and after Katerina had introduced him as an important guest, the company as a whole gave him an even warmer welcome. "You enjoy yourself thoroughly here, in truth, just as in Milan," began Enzo. But at that moment, some obviously tactless soul interrupted him by crying out, "Long live Milan!" Enzo, however, overlooked the fellow's delight and continued solemnly, "I grew up with servants in my parents' home, which is why I am happy to see such a sight here. Happy servants serving one worth worshipping." With these words, he cast a gentle glance upon Katerina, which garnered a sight from several simple girls from the kitchen, and then the applause resounded. Would that he had known, though he could not, that this gesture took such unpleasant, painful root in Maria's heart, amidst all the wondrous fruit of that garden in bloom for our insanely charming Enzo. "Pass me that instrument," said the young man, floating on the waves of admiration, and in his hands the lute, usually a noble instrument, became the magical means of emerging adultery, infidelity, betrayal, perversity, crime, and all that is unpleasing to God. And the lady to whom Enzo sang that evening had in place of eyes 2 suns, hair of life-giving starbeams, exactly like our Katerina's, and a complexion paler than a milk, exactly like our Katerina's, and 2 pigeons beneath her gown, and a gait that made one ache strangely, exactly as our Katerina. The lady was simply a gift from God, but this was not Katerina, for a divine gift would not have come from the devil's lair, as had the gift of her beauty. A divine gift would not make a man want to scream as our Enzo wanted, and we together with him. I want her body, even if it should be the last thing I have. The final rhymes of that beautiful song evoked another round of applause, and then, tactfully, Enzo excused himself from further participation, saying he was tired. And I can tell you that the adoration that accompanied his departure did not go unnoticed by Katerina. Thank you.
Prose writers may sit, but we poets have a shorter job to do, so I chose to stand and thus express the body language, the honor and the pleasure of being here, my very first time at the University of Chicago. Thank you for having me. Let me first read a poem from the collection The City and the Child. I will read it in Slovenian in my mother tongue, only to let you titillate with the sound that will remain incomprehensible to you. But at least you'll get the rhythm, and then I'll switch to English. Mesto in otrok. Noben stok zares ni brez namena. Le kadar arhangel se nam prikaže kot v planini modri svišč, za bežen hip morda spoznamo, kje stoji izbrana domovina. Ne bo zamrl tvoj babilonski vrišč. Zato ne spijo pesniki. Naloga zdaj se jasna zdi. To bo kronika in v njej bolečina. Velika kot gruda ledenika, ki se topi. In preplavi nasade maka in vasi, tarče v frizu vitkega portala in razkošne gube turškega srebra. Vsaka solza te poglobi. Stojiš na skali, ki se ne premakne. Okrog tebe svet se kruši v prepad. Ti piješ živo vodo, Črpaš jo iz ust ljudi, ki s tabo dihajo. Zraven so kot dokaz, ko se zjutraj spet rodiš. Kot tale pesem. Še malo in utišal jo v plas. A 1000 odmevov se na mesto nje pognalo bo v zrak. Ker ljubezen, ki teče ti skozi žile, je seme, svet in sad. Now, the very same poem in a translation by Christopher Merrill and myself, and it is an eponymous, it's a poem from the eponymous collection, The City and the Child. But before I proceed, let me just quickly give you a bit of a context. The book was written on the banks of the River Danube at the very end of the wars of Yugoslav succession, and it obviously deals, if that's the word, with both the loss of multicultural Yugoslavia. It laments the destruction of the civilization embodied in the city itself, in which Sarajevo stands for all the cities, the similar makeup and fate. As well as celebrates in the latter part of the book that is encapsulated by the child, celebrates the birth of the first of my 3 children so far. The City and the Child. No cry, really, is meaningless. Only when an archangel appears like a blue gentian on a mountain slope do we know, if only for an instant, our native land. Your Babylonian moan won't die away. That's why poets never sleep. The task seems clear now. This will be a chronicle of pain, the size of a melting glacier, which floods poppy fields and villages, targets painted on the portal's slender frieze, the lush filigree of Turkish silver. Each tear deepens you. You stand on the immovable rock. The world around you crumbles into the abyss. You drink the water of life, drawn from the mouths of those who breathe with you. Each morning they come to witness your rebirth, like this poem. It won't be long before an avalanche silences it, but 1,000 echoes will spring up in its place. For the love flowing through our veins is the seed, the blossom, and the fruit. Cosmopolis. The poem is dedicated to Josip Osti, a Bosnian writer and translator who, in his latter time, after having moved to Ljubljana, that is outside of the hell on earth, and had also switched the language, which is very unusual, and is now writing in Slovenian. Cosmopolis, for Josip Osti, Sarajevo, Ljubljana. Listen well. Is that the trumpet call? The cavalry rides through history. The shadow of an ancient battle wants to be the truth again. A distant starway winds toward the cloud. Mountains fall, a chalice trembles. Emptiness spills over the edge. Yet you, miraculously, grow faster than you can be destroyed. A titmouse will not leave its nest. The west wind tempts you with redemption in a hollowed loaf of bread at the Last Supper. A broken toy. More children are missing. Yet you endure. You interrupt the world's monologue, its endless drone. You are the flickering snow on the screen which is always on. The vault of the universe above you is crystal clear. The rest of us stare helplessly into the cold prison of the stars. We watch a finger rise from the flame flickering behind your back, which never consumes you. And on the arch of the sky the finger writes, tirelessly, I am, I am. Grand Hotel, Europe. The carline thistles wither in the vase on the shelf. No man's land beckons me. I'm guilty because I won't forget. That would be easy, like the course of a hasty flock cutting the sky. I lean against the window, as others have before me. The taste of fruit, the nude woman who visits me in dreams. Nothing I touch surprises me anymore. And the harmony of a still life doesn't help. A different pain blinds me. I want to share it with someone, but with whom? If I whisper it alone into the night, its echo won't find its way back. If we all speak, it vanishes like a copper engraving in a blast furnace. But I cannot renounce it. Mine is the fear of the fugitive who couldn't hide in this cheap room. When the merciless God covers the window frame, only the mirror will preserve their faces. I'll lend them my throat to intercept the barking of dogs and the blare of a hunter's horn. I can't even see myself anymore, yet I must sing for them to find peace in my song, finally united. The following poem, entitled The Lord of Tears, is in a vague manner about the so-called butcher of the Balkans, Slobodan Milosevic. The Lord of Tears. Let it be. May your ears never hear the fluttering of jackdaws spreading over the gutters of watchtowers like heavenly fruit, which rots in silence. May your steps measure the bottomless depths of the lobby in the academy. Here, the breath of emissaries from distant embassies nurtures an ancient dream. The dream of endless lands where the same name is spoken with the same dread. May your spit harden into crystal. May your hand caress no one. May the heroes who cross the Illyrian hills and lay down in the dunes by the warm sea tell your future, inevitably alone. May the rising tide wash over the ruins the armies left behind. May the commanders listen with deadly seriousness to the orders given by memory, which thickens like wax. You lose it to seal up the legacy of pain, growing steadily in the collected works of the court poets. They'll flee with you to the shores of the divided island. It will be too late when you kneel beneath a cruel star. In a poem dedicated to another Sarajevan Croatian, the Bosnian Croatian writer Miljenko Jergović. Bosnian Elegy for Miljenko Jergović, Sarajevo, Zagreb. Sing, young poet, touch my burning skin, darkened by long treks through wild hills to the ends of the world. Don't give up now, when the gunners' fevered sights are trained on the stained facades of museums and palaces. They cower silently, like spent reliquaries. Just list what remains. Flocks of swallows twittering under former arches and campaniles, the eternal wisdom of the French novel we read in the bomb shelter, the silvery down which disappears from a baby's earlobes, thunder from the Pannonian plains. The smell of gunpowder irritates the lungs. We haven't yet crossed the line. Speak now. The surface of the pool ripples. I don't know if it will be blessed. Rings glow in the depths. What remains unknown rejoices. Believe me, I am ready. Sing to me for the last time of the gentle love of storms, of the mysteries of a woman's shadow and a marble staircase. Sing as you sang before your hair turned gray. Newborn Ode, so that not everything will be entirely depressing. Newborn Ode. A soft baritone lifts you up, the one that drives the sap through the neighbor's cherry tree. The lunar eclipse that covered your forehead glorifies you, and in a cupboard a porcelain bowl vibrates softly, like an alto sax. Cinnamon is honored to be compared to the fragrance of your hair. When the vein in your wrist pulses, the beginning and the end of time dissolve into a hymn of marble slabs. You grow faster than a river changing course on the bridges. You rise miraculously like yeastless bread. When I glide my hand over your body smaller than a ripe fig, the sky glows like fireworks. I touch the soft crown of your head, which throws the compass needle into confusion. It opens for clarity, no longer accessible to me, but it pours infinitely into you as from a fragile jug. Your breath drives me to the edge. Sometimes it makes me dizzy. Yet I stand firm. When I hold you in my arms, I am the rock from the Old Testament. And just one, if this were my reading, I would do the same. But I have to stick it out. To the poets exiled in Amsterdam. Amsterdam was one of the many West European, Western cities where the emigres and refugees from the lands of former Yugoslavia gathered, and oddly enough, they seem to have been getting along very well outside of the contested territory that is no more. To the poets exiled in Amsterdam. The scene must open with a narrow house, sleepless with the fear of a knock at the door, and with a bed in which a child lies sobbing. The night watch awaits a challenger. The throats of refugees are hoarse. No word can find its way to them, and Spinoza has locked God in polished crystals. On windy squares, white as the hips of caravels, the descendants of mountain lust write their testament, which waits for a reader. The calm furrows the sails. The skin resembles dried parchment. The only desire they still feel, to bid farewell, farewell to the hymn of the choir, for every exile invents his own language. The deadly episode in the southern ravines was brief, yet poets stand on the shore protected by the law of longing. They don't care that no one will live to see the return, and their gaze, dimly glowing like an eternal light, rises above the uproar of the mob, dancing endlessly. And just one poem from the, as of yet, unpublished collection of poems in translation, translated by Andrew Zawacki and myself. It's from the collection that came out in the original in 2000, and it's called Unended. And just a letter home. I long for a comfort that cannot be measured, forgotten caves where Bach can't reach, the bell that sounds for a monarchy not found on any globe, for the feverish concentration of hunters who oil and polish their guns. I long for the salt that tears contain, the marrow that boils in my bones. I long for the miracle opening up like a mouth when nothing comes out. If I am the only one listening, the percussion of grace in my loins is what I become, pulling the trigger like no one has taught me and no one would know how to gauge. Alone on a trail that nobody knows, I follow the line of your neck. Your head is tilted back. I give myself to whatever it is that strains my muscles and forces me to flower like the scatter of a shotgun fires, singing at last from a single place called Rome, Medina, Jerusalem, the place which is home to me as only one place can be home. And the very, very last one, it's called Cast Vote. That crystal morning, snow over snow, in capital cities, they might be ashamed of it. That conference of birds and light upon water, the parliament of dreams that knows no fear of getting old, and she, alone this winter morning, her face that sees itself within a flower etched by ice along the glass, her reflection thawing and piercing the window. Is she really so strange? Outside, her shadow sputters again like a match refusing gravity and singe. In the vast expanse of frost and worry, not even a minute to think. She was the one with the courage to disobey silence, disobey orders. She could not be voted down and said, "Look, in the shallows of this common river, the Black Sea claims as its own, fish still wriggle out of a boy's hands, tracing a nearly perfect arc, and with them everything that flows, everything that falls, rushes without reason as one's childhood rushes by. Look, we are not a wall, but a shutter some far-off God is opening halfway." Thank you.
This point will open to the floor to everyone for discussion. Before that, I want to tell you, feel free to get up and purchase any books if you want to, because the seminary Tom from the seminary club will have to leave at 6, so you have only 10 minutes to do so. And otherwise, I will ask Bill Martin from the conflict department, who is also a translator from German and Polish, to moderate the discussion. questions or comments.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Oh no, you can say no.
No, actually, it's actually a lot better question.
So, do we have enough time before the shop closes?
Well, people can just get up and it will be
Okay, that's
Yeah, please,
free
definitely feel free to do that. Before I open the floor to discussion, I just want to ask a question to both of you and maybe think of this in terms of setting some, not parameters, but just as kind of a generator for further discussion. Something I notice in both of your works is an attention to voice and also a craftedness in terms of tropes, both in terms of lyric tropes of address and metaphor. I mean, obviously, it's poetry in Alesh's work, but also in your work in terms of various narrative perspectives. And I guess I'm curious to know, I read an interview with you, Alesh, that Andrew had done with you, and then also your work on Boris Novak, and your discussion about the relationship of poetic language to history and to tragic events, the catastrophe of Yugoslavia. But I'm curious to know more how you both think about the relationship of your craft and the tools of your craft specifically to events in history, whether they're 500 years ago or to things that you've lived through yourself. Just maybe I can open this up to either one of you.
I'm tempted to say this is a very good question. What's your next question? Because it is a tall order. But I had attempted to address this vexing question in my nonfiction book, The Hidden Handshake. Marketing pitch, it's over there. But I continue to be confused and not entirely at ease with the interlocking forces of history and language. Because it seems to me that on the one hand, of course, the only true homeland the poet, hence a writer, has is her language. But that's an old dictum which is nonetheless, I think, rings true, at least to me. Then, of course, you have the dilemmas of I'm approaching the answer through a detour. You have a dilemmas of, say, the language that is shared by many nations, such as English, for instance, and here the detour comes in. I'm reminded of a response that Seamus Heaney, an Irish Nobel Prize winner poet, has given to a similar question, and he said that he was comparing his own language and his own use of the language that is obviously shared by the language that Winston Hugh Auden was using, obviously English, but with what kind of inflection and from what perspective? He said that, and I here tend to concur with him, that the many layered accretion of residual and contemporary influences that penetrate the language from the historical events and in turn are shaped by the language are entirely different in Irish case as opposed to the English case. He said the Irish use of the language is obviously pressed down or burdened or taxed with the need and the almost never fulfilled task of speaking or singing about traumatic events in the history of the collective that uses this particular language, whereas the English language reflects, by and large, the role of the master, the role of the, shall we say, oppressor, the colonizer, and is hence, to a certain extent, oblivious in the English use of the English language. I won't go into American use of English language now, but I think that he really hit the right button here, and I think that I cannot not at least subconsciously, account for, in my use of the language, account for the threshold events, the important not only events but aspects of the community that uses my mother tongue, Slovenian, and that is often surfacing. This particular, say, trauma is surfacing in the need for a poet to emphasize the bonds, however tenuous and however fragmented and fragile they may be. That is, the bonds between an individual, the poet on the one hand, and the community on the other. There seemed to be less freedom, shall we say, for a poet working in lesser used languages. Less freedom to pursue entirely individual, in fact, even individualistic vision. I have to admit to, if that's a sin, I have to admit to a sin that I'm committing time and again when writing poetry, and that is the sin of not being fully fair and square divorced from the life of the community. I'm not singing about my own pleasures, anxieties, and idiosyncratic, lust drives. I am always, in however an oblique manner, addressing, touching upon, bruising past certain, as I said, collective traumas, which, if they need to be reduced to a single trauma, it is the fact that it is the language of a community that never, until 15 years ago, experienced the statehood. Hence, it was always a very precarious language always on the cusp of disappearing, to be, pathetic but not entirely mistaken. So in that sense, I think that ligature between an individual and a community forces its way through in the text of my poems, and I dare say in the poems of others working in this language.
There's something very public about your poems, in a sense, at least the ones that you read now. And I'm curious, because you've talked about the fact that Slovenia is in a position of having to develop a public sphere. If that is a conscious choice on your part, or if it's, is it something that's reflected when you're writing, thinking about the poem as a public mode of discourse, in a sense, rather than like the typical sort of lyric is more inward directed mode of, okay.
Mm-hmm. I think that has to do with primary socialization as a poet, that always already occurs within the folds of one's inherited, received tradition. And that tradition, in the case of Slovenian letters, is shot through with poets who have not recoiled in horror from addressing the public issues of the day, public affairs of the day. Edward Kocbe comes to mind. His selected poems have come out a couple years ago from Princeton University Press, and he is probably the most central poet of the latter part of the 20th century in Slovenian letters, having been a partisan resistance fighter, Christian socialist, dissident in the communist Slovenia / Yugoslavia. So his wide range of topics that he covered in his voluminous poetry production really oscillates between deeply intimate and entirely public. Just as, for instance, The City and the Child has this sort of dual structure. The first part of the book addresses the issues that are more or less known to everybody who is not entirely blind to the daily news, or was blind to the daily news, because it addresses the destruction of a civilization, of the country in which I was born, etc., etc. The second part is more of an intimate affair that dramatizes the joys and anxieties in the face of seeing my first child being born into the world that is replete with destruction. Yet the very mystery of life, which is in the fact that we continue it, seems to have guided my pen word processor. So in that sense, the oscillations between the public and private seem to inform my work. I do not think, if that's a conscious choice, do not think that I would be entirely comfortable in either only writing poems for that address more of public matters, public affairs, but neither do I think that I would be entirely content in having retreated into the ivory tower of navel gazing that would be then passed on as deeply individualistic and idiosyncratic and hence lyrical. So it's always the oscillation. It's neither nor. It's a no man's land in between, where I feel comfortable, only because it is so scarcely populated.
I believe you ask a really important question, and certainly, Aleš is a poet and I'm a fiction writer, so in fiction you, however, have to treat reality and history differently. My first novel is characterized by the absence of the immediate trauma, although completely, obviously inspired by that immediate trauma. I mentioned the young narrator, which is a young Bosnian who could be 18 years old, who could be me or not, whatever. And it is obvious that in this novel I try to speak through different voices, historically different voices, and also Mark, stylistically, in order to speak and not to speak about the trauma of these years. Basically, I set up this event in '95. This is basically when your book was published in Slovenia, and I remember when The City and Child came out in Zagreb. I was just in college, and I read Aleš as my as someone who spoke to me directly, although it was translated, it was indifferent, although things that happened to us were not, or were just in one part of Slovenian experience. However, here there's a certain parallelism that through these poems you can speak about these traumas, of not addressing them directly, which is something that I will try to do 5 years later in my first novel. It took me after my first novel 6 years to come back to the place the place I had to leave, to my hometown of Sarajevo, and to write in this Elijah's Chair, in my new novel, about the siege of Sarajevo, but not only about that. And then also I had the problem how to speak about it, so I put it, I wrote about it. I created a character that will be a foreigner that coming to my hometown, discovering my hometown, as in a way I was discovering Sarajevo through the eyes of a foreigner. So here obviously the question of voices is quite important.
I'm curious about the narrator of Elijah's Chair, because I've just read the first chapter of it, and there's a sense of a very poetic voice, a very lyrical voice actually, and I'm wondering how, what is the role for a voice for you, and also this kind of imagination, this sort of alchemy of historical events? I mean, why isn't he a very reticent narrator? He's a narrator who is trying to say something and keeps overstepping the boundary or missing the mark. At least that's my sense of it. I mean, I haven't read the whole book, so I can't speak to that. That's my immediate sense. So I'm curious how what the role of this individual narrator, this individual voice is.
Again, difficult question, but the whole story, of course, it is probably good for discussion. The whole story about Elijah's Chair is about an Austrian writer who, of course, happened to live in Paris, as every left-wing Austrian did after, a good left-wing Austrian did after '68. So, of course, after a while, he came back to his country, that, of course, he hates because of its participation in Holocaust and Nazism and everything, and he will discover that his family history was not such as was told to him before, that his father is actually a Sarajevo Jew. And this happened at the moment when the siege of Sarajevo starts. So he goes there to, find his roots. He doesn't know himself really what he's trying to figure out. What do you do when you find out that your father was not your father? And it happened that, that this put you on the side of the victims and not on the side of the perpetrators by the very fact of being somebody's son. So, and he's of course question, are we really, let's say, predetermined by our origins, or do we create our destinies, and so on, by our own? And here's the image of the city, and Sarajevo again as the city of the cities, metropolis, where you make your own destiny regardless of who you are and what you are. So, of course, he will find out the very hard way, and I can get into the details. In hear this voice, Austrian writer, 50 years old, who will basically put together two traumas. Holocaust as the central event of the 20th century, and then the event that will close the 20th century, which was the siege of my hometown.
So, are there questions? Things that these discussions have generated in you?
Well, I have a question for Aleš especially. Most of, or at least two of your translators mention almost in a fascinating, clearly they are fascinated by the way you write, that you have long periods of silence and then within weeks or maybe a couple of months produce a whole book. And I'm curious if you can talk about that, about the process of writing. And this is sort of a related question to, in one of my classes we're just reading Palm of Snow, where the writing of poems comes as a sort of a voice from outside, as if it's dictated. He's just the medium. And so I'm wondering, as a poet, I mean, Igor, as a fiction writer, we always hear that fiction writing is a little bit different, but especially the poetry. What is your sense of that in your process of writing?
It's true. It's interesting that you've noticed that. It's true that both Christopher Merrill, with whom I translated, co-translated two collections of mine, and Andrew Zawacki, with whom I translated one collection four-handedly together, note that this particular way of writing, though it seems that it has come so natural to me that I don't find obviously anything unusual about it. Unusual about what? About the fact that I could go long periods of time without actually writing a single line, and then retreating into usually a solitary room on the coast someplace, the coast of the Adriatic Sea, where I like to be like a beach guard in the winter time. That is, there's no business being there. So I go there, I hole up, and I often do pen the entire collection in the stretch of several weeks, that then I can rework at home in hullabaloo and commotion of the family life. But it seems that it is not only because I can't afford to be a misanthrope round the clock, but it's also because I feel that the proverbial or the stereotypical poet who uses in paper napkins the backs of the brown bags and the unprinted pages of the book that he happens to be reading at the time for scribbling his thoughts that will eventually transmogrify into poems. I am not of that kind at all. If anything, I am privy to, or I'm subject to another stereotype, and that is the stereotype that is manifestly present in Snow, an excellent novel, where the poet seems to be only a medium for a voice that speaks beyond the confines of his body and soul, where he only lends a pen. But that is not only, I venture to say, it is not only the sort of passivity embedded in a medium. I think that it has to, any medium that only transcribes the hidden messages. But in my case, it seems more akin to a well that is being, in the course of my day-to-day life, being slowly filled with snippets and fragments and images, and when it reaches a certain level, usually the edge, then I really need to have a time entirely to myself. And I have been so far fortunate, I need to knock on the wood. It's a fake wood. Knock on the wood, because I have been fortunate so far that I was able to retreat for a considerable block of time when I would really lock myself up and not exit for days to no end, having just the basic needs attended to, that is food and cigarettes in this order, and then sleep on occasion if need be. So that's something where it's a period of time when I completely change the rhythm. I would go to bed, say, early in the morning and sleep through most of the day, get up in the afternoon, and then begin writing. I'm a nyctalop, I'm a night person, and it seems that I can only indulge this sort of illicit pleasure in seizing the night, when I'm divorced from the demands and the mandates of everyday life, being, full-time a professional and the husband and the father, etc. So this sort of retreat, this isolation, works best for me. I do see that it would be a bit unusual, but I can easily, I assure you, go without an itch to write for quite some time. Now, if those periods of dormancy are too long, then I begin to worry, has the well dried up? But so far it hasn't happened yet, and I think that I'd like to continue employing this method if the angels will continue guarding over me.
The same question about how well, it's obviously much different, but because it simply takes too much time to write 200 or 300 pages. When I wrote my first novel, the outcome was like 100 pages. I call it like short flight novel. 100 pages, you go between one European city to another, you're done with it. So in my second novel, there's a little, it could be at least intercontinental, Chicago, London, or something like that. So whether the quality changes, I don't know, but it leaves a different kind of impression, definitely. Whether you can just get into the novel and live with the novel for, let's say, several days, or you just read it in 2 hours. So two different rhythms. My experience was that I wrote maybe one short story, and I don't have too many topics, too many ideas. Once I have the idea, I try to transform it into novel, which is basically much differently from what Borges said. Of course, he had so much ideas, and why bother writing novel when you can write a short story in a couple of days? And my idea, if I have just this one, why bother writing just short story? It would be much better to write a novel. What I like about, for instance, this is my first novel, and of course I'm presenting it right now, where basically the memories of the second novel are much fresher. So it's a little bit coming back to the period when I was writing this and was quite ambitious student in philosophy, literature, and so on. And everything is full of literary, let's say, a literary theory, metafiction, and also with the history of literature, like patriarchism and everything. And this many readers found very interesting, and some of them were quite how to say, pissed off with this sort of postmodern playing with the genre, styles, ideas, voices, and actually dealing with something very, very serious. I don't know. I still like it. It is a different me in this second novel, definitely. And it took me 3-4 years of developing the novel, writing the novel. But it was maybe because, again, coming to the topic, because it was easier for me to write about tragic destiny of a Renaissance poet than about also quite a tragic destiny of an Austrian writer who will discover that by some link is a Sarajevan, and who will have to go to that place that I myself left when I was 14. So obviously it depends on what you are writing about and how you approach your subject. The question whether the well dried up, it's always present. Are we writers once you stop writing, or basically these two books give me a privilege of social status of a writer? Am I a writer now? Do I have any ideas whether I will write anything else? It's hard to know. That's a risk of this métier.
A question for Igor. About the second book where you use the Austrian writer to kind of talk about Sarajevo. It's kind of like bringing a stranger and having a remove between the city and the character. Does this kind of give you more liberty or freedom to talk about the subject? I mean, this is something we see in many books kind of from Europe, so I wonder if you could comment on that.
Absolutely. It gave me a distance, and also it gave me let's say, a neutral observer of what is going on. Of course, he is not only in search for his own, who he is at the age of 50, what his identity is at all. But of course, he's there there's a shelling every day, there's a siege going on, he's involved, and he got involved into the events. And it was easier for me to speak through his eyes, what he sees, not only discovering the city itself, but also the siege, the war in Bosnia. Of course, you put the guy who has a problem with his own identity in the middle of a war, fought for clear, pure ethnic identities. And this gave me opportunity to let's say, confront these two concepts. The city, on one hand, as a cosmopolitan city of where everybody is equal, which I experienced during my short time in Paris, that I was not French, but I was Parisian. I was the guy who went to readings, concerts, all over the place. I was the citizen of that city, although I didn't have the French citizenship and wasn't able to vote. So this is something that city gives you, that you can be part of it, no matter if you're a foreigner or not, whereas you can't be part of the country if you don't have good or valid enough papers. And on the other hand, you have, let's say, those who fight the war in order to clarify, to make someone, to reduce an individual to his ethnic or religious background. And so these two concepts are actually quite involved, and there will be a love story that is quite incestuous, so which is always a big scandal, that two people that never met each other could have an incestuous relationship, whereas the idea about purity of nation is based on the one law, which is don't mix with the other, just mix with the same. So it's a little bit that nationalism or religious fundamental is incestuous in itself, and so on and so on. So I'm playing on this, the question, the big question of the blood and what it is for our individual destinies. So maybe this is the answer, I don't know.
Other questions?
Just to follow up on, you mentioned the need for distance. And it's the question I wanted to put to both of you, which follows up on the first question, but just restates it negatively. Since you're both writing in response to historical situation, and I think you want to write in some way that's adequate to that historical. Maybe adequate's not the right word. Maybe there's a better word for that. Adequate to the historical situation. Is it useful in defining your voice as authors to do it negatively? But what sort of prohibitions do you encounter when you're writing in that respect? What do you not want to do in responding to your own history, the Yugoslavian history?
For poets, it's maybe more difficult.
I'm searching through my REM. I don't seem to be able to pin down a particular taboo. Now, obviously, not every theme lends itself in the same way to being encapsulated in a text. But I had covered, if that's the word, a variety of historical experiences or collective experiences to dramatize both the hidden pockets of freedom that one needs to carve out even in dire circumstances. On the other hand, again, trying to emphasize, to shed some light on these ligatures that bind a person and the collective, because I think that we had come by now, in the light of the short century, the 20th century, we had come to see that it's impossible to live meaningfully outside of the community, though it is by all means possible to die meaninglessly in the name of the community. So this sort of an ongoing tug of war is what intrigues me. I think that there are very few that write about the collective events only, where the individual voice would be entirely subsumed. These seem to be the stuff of epic, the narrative in epic vein that died with the last gasp was 19th century. On the other hand, there is a plethora of poets who are perfectly content to contemplate themselves only and their own life or their own fantasies, and that somehow left me dissatisfied too. Somehow there was something that was wanting in that exclusive, obsessive focus on oneself only. So how to navigate the terrain without falling into the traps of one or the other extreme. Now that is something that I'm intrigued by and sucked into, because it seems to me that writing in one of the simplified extremes, but in the manner of one of the extremes would mean that you're basically protected from dilemmas, from anxieties, from anguish, that comes from, or that springs up from the inability to decide. And while I would not want to be like the Peridian's donkey that ultimately died because it couldn't decide. So too, I would be loath to be subsumed only under one heading, either the poet of the nation, which was very much de rigueur in the romantic model of a poet as the spokesman of the people, blah blah. That was not only de rigueur, but exerted a powerful influence way into the 20th century, particularly in the nations that have, like the nation that I was born into, have not experienced the statehood, hence did not feel as a collective so secure in their own position in the world. But on the other hand, I think that the complete retreat from the public affairs is more often than not a very easy cop-out in the name of pursuing unfettered freedom, in the name of pursuing the depth of an individual voice that pays no heed whatsoever to the circumstances, the context, and the frame within which this pursuit takes place, is likewise too much of an easy way out. And if the only challenges that are worth rising to are the difficult ones, then I'd much rather struggle and suffer of anguish while navigating this uncharted terrain between the collective and an individual than to be safely ensconced in either one or the other camp. Especially because camp is the word to be used here, because once you're a member of a school, if you will, member of a poetic school, a literary movement and so on, then you can actually hide behind it. But if you're out in the open, exposed, fragile, you basically deal, you traffic with what is the most intriguing, but at the same time the most prohibitively attractive and punishing, and those are human emotions. And the pursuit of something that refuses to be rendered in words, and that is this je ne sais quoi, that sort of metaphysical surplus, if you will, that can only become available in my book, can only become available to be written up if one sheds the pretense, if one exposes oneself. And in that sense, not being member of any of the camps, not being member of any of the groups of the literary movements makes you paradoxically more alone, but by the same token, freer.
So if epic is impossible, do you think that is that impossible for you? Is that personal, or do you have a political conception of why the epic as such is impossible?
Probably in part because this is a model that has been spent, and because both the writer and the reader know that. It would be very difficult to me, that might be an impossible task, to infuse the old model with the new substance. Although, on the other hand, of course, there is grounds to argue that it is perfectly conceivable to not restore the old model, but to revitalize the old model. I mean, restoration of the model simply means setting it up as it was before under the new dispensation. And that is probably bound to fail. But to reinvigorate, revitalize the old model, that would be probably possible. Now, I haven't picked up that gauntlet because I understand the limits of my own imagination. And it seemed to me that both my familial upbringing, as well as the era in which I was coming of age, made me more attuned to the oscillations of desire between being hidden behind the straight-faced facade of the community on the one hand, or being the victim of this illusion of grandeur that comes from belief that what you are doing really has nothing to do with the context, either the urban context or the historical or the social and political context, that all that matters is you and yourself and self alone. Io, solo io, sempre io. I think that of course is necessary but not sufficient condition for poetry that aims to survive its time. That the self is crucial, but it's not be-all and end-all of poetic dictum.
Yeah, I would just come to this question that is that all the Eastern Europe, and not only Eastern Europe, but 19th century idea of poets as of course spokesmen of their nations, and then after that, of course, fiction writers. One of the experiences of the wars in Yugoslavia was that all these big authors that were spokesmen of their nation turned out to be quite nasty guys, and turned out to imagine for their nation actually a horror. And they were quite implicated into political process. Wherever you go, you can find the writers there on the place, either actively leading the wars or being like ideological advisors to their lords. Of course, one thing that I would never want to be is that, because I'm not sure, because this is the example that I would try to avoid at any cost in my writing. And I would be very miserable if any group, I don't know which group would take me as its spokesman, would take my novels and then find, I don't know, it would be, it is unthinkable. So one of the things to avoid when one takes himself seriously enough, of course. The other thing, of course, that we always come to is, so we are the writers from the Balkans and coming there, and so of course you're identified with the region and what happened to the region. And here the problem is on both sides. First of all, the readers in the region, of course, always accept from the literature what they learn before. They accept basically certain interpretations of their own history. And then you have nationalistic or non-nationalistic literature, whatever, but they expect the topics familiar to them. On the other hand, the Western readership expect you to write only about that because, of course, you have nothing to add to the general community of the readers. The problem you have here is that, for instance, in my second novel, the Holocaust part, the Second World War part, Austrian, German Jewish part, would be not so much interesting for the local readers because they want to know what I write about the war. On the other hand, this part would be interesting for the Western reader, whereas my task would be to make the what happened in the former Yugoslavia equally interesting for them, not only to discover what happened, but to discover that this is their own history. So, on the other hand, of course, what I try to do is to say to my local readers that could read this in original, that what was going on in Austria or what was going on with Holocaust, which also took part in several of these places, it's their own history. So it's not, this is this situation where I always think about Isaac Bashevis Singer, where you write in Yiddish, you have very small readership, and you write about the topics that are so much connected to this small, destroyed readers, a group of readers, but you still are writing something that everyone in every part of the world could accept as a universal literature. So this is the goal whether we can make it and not just pass as some sort of exotic writers that will come out at the horizon and be of interest only for the specialist. We'll see. I hope it's coming, it's happening.
I don't want to ignore any questions, but at the same time I want to open the evening toward that attractive part there on the table with wine and cheese, and we can continue the discussion in a little bit less formal way. Thank you.
Thank you.